Hello, I'm R.A. Spratt. I write and perform this podcast. If you'd like to support the show, I'm a children's author, so you can buy a book by me, or you can buy me a coffee by going to buymeacoffee.com/storiesRASpratt. It's an easy way to make a small thank you gift to the show so I can keep kicking this can down the road. The podcast directory you're using right now should have a link to my Buy Me a Coffee page in the show notes, or you can type it into your browser. That's buymeacoffee.com/storiesRASpratt. All contributions are gratefully appreciated. Hello and welcome to Bedtime Stories with me, R.A. Spratt. Well, the never-ending book week tour is chugging along. I've just finished week 3. I was in Sydney all this last week visiting schools. I had a great time, had some very fun experiences. And then tomorrow I head off again. The first day is good because that's here in the Southern Highlands, and then I've got a day in Sydney. And then I've got to drive up to Newcastle and Maitland for a couple of days up there. That's about a 4-hour drive from where I live. So that's what's happening this week. And then that'll be the last week of me doing school visits, which that's actually the hardest type of touring because you've got to arrange all the travel stuff yourself and turn up and you don't know where you're going. You've got to find somewhere to park. You've never met the people there before. So that's it's a lot to do. And then after that, I've still got 3 weeks of touring, but then we head into festivals and things like that. So it's going to get easier. I just have to get through this week and then it will get easier, hopefully. Anyway, I was inspired this week. I was listening to something about Pythagoras and I knew about Pythagoras. I went to a school that was really, really big on maths. So it was, oh gosh, I can hear the dog scratching at the door. I'll go let the dog in. Hang on. Okay, he's in. I let the dog in. As I was saying, I went to a school that was really, really big on maths, and everyone who went there, you just got it drilled into you from year 7 to year 12. Pythagoras' theorem was a big part of my life for many years. But I heard something, they were talking about the history of Pythagoras, the actual person, and I am endlessly fascinated in the storyteller Aesop because I love telling stories myself, and Aesop's fables. Like some of the earliest and most loved stories like the tortoise and the hare. And anyway, I'd never realized that Pythagoras and Aesop came from the same quite small island, Greek island near Turkey. Anyway, I am someone who gets fascinated with ideas and then can't let them go. So that's the idea I was fascinated with this week, the idea of Pythagoras. And I did all this research. And I just want to emphasize, because I know sometimes young listeners get a little annoyed with me when they realize that there is a fictional element to some of the stories I tell. So just so you know, there's a distinction, like the Greek myths are myths. Pythagoras was actually a real person. Okay. And maths is obviously real. Anyway, let's not ruin the story with too much reality. Let's just get into it. So today I'm going to be telling you the true history of Pigthagorus as told by Nanny Piggins. "Oh my goodness, what's wrong?" asked Nanny Piggins when she entered the living room and was horrified to find Derek reading a maths textbook. "Those maths teachers aren't pretending to teach you about pie, are they? Because I warn you, they say they're talking about pie, but no delicious flaky pastry or sweetened fruit is involved. They're talking about a mathematical constant that never ends, even if you bake it a real pie. The fact that they subject children to such diabolical linguistic subterfuge is an outrage, in my opinion. I've a good mind to call the Royal Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children and report your entire school for trying to damage the brains of young people by pretending that maths is a delicious dessert." "No, it's not pie, the mathematical constant," said Derek. "Thank goodness," said Nanny Piggins. "Now I think I shall have to eat a pie to recover from the shock. Perhaps a chocolate cream pie with chocolate ice cream on the side." "No, today we're learning about Pythagoras' theorem," said Derek. "Good gracious, that's even worse," said Nanny Piggins. "I can't believe people are still teaching the work of that dangerous lunatic." "Lunatic," said Derek. "He was just a mathematician." "Mathematician, lunatic? There's very little difference as far as I can see," said Nanny Piggins. "But Pythagoras was really clever. He figured out how to measure triangles, didn't he?" said Samantha. "Oh, please," said Nanny Piggins. "He didn't?" asked Michael. "Well, no one knows for sure exactly what Pythagoras did or didn't do, because he lived so long ago," said Nanny Piggins. "And he was so odd that half of what was written down about him is written down in rude poems making fun of him. And how do you know so much about it? Asked Michael. Are you perhaps related to Pythagoras? Shh, said Nanny Piggins. We try to keep it a secret. It's not something the Piggins family is proud of. Was Pythagoras a she and one of your distant cousins? Asked Samantha. No, the history books were partially correct, said Nanny Piggins. Pythagoras was a man, but not much of a man. His full name was Bramwell Pigthagorus Piggins. We made him change it a bit to hide the family connection. Why? What did he do that was so dreadful? Asked Derek. Well, he wasn't so much dreadful as very strange, said Nanny Piggins, and people credit Pigthagorus with being the father of mathematics and music. Are you saying he wasn't? Asked Derek. No, it's just that he was a Bramwell, and it wasn't quite as impressive as it sounds, said Nanny Piggins. You're going to have to tell us the whole story, said Michael. All right, I will, said Nanny Piggins. So she whipped up a plate of delicious tiganites for the children to snack on while she told her tale. It all began 2,500 years ago in the ancient Greek history days, said Nanny Piggins. Zeus wasn't involved, was he? Asked Samantha. Oh no, Zeus came from the ancient Greek mythology days. Pythagoras, or Pigthagorus as we know him, was from ancient Greek reality. Well, most of the time, said Nanny Piggins. He was born on the Greek island of Samos, which was actually a fair way from mainland Greece. It was much closer to Turkey and Egypt. Pigthagorus' mother was from a very wealthy and important family on Samos, and his father was a successful merchant. When they knew they were expecting a baby, Mrs. Pigthagorus went to visit the Oracle of Delphi to ask how the baby would turn out. Why didn't she just want to wait and find out? Asked Michael. She couldn't bear the suspense, said Nanny Piggins. She liked spoilers. Well, what did the Oracle say? Asked Samantha. The Oracle said, your baby will grow up to be a man who is supremely beautiful, wise, and beneficial to humankind. Oh, really? Said Derek. Indeed, said Nanny Piggins. People don't usually describe men as beautiful, said Derek. Well, when you're an oracle, you can do what you like, said Nanny Piggins. Anyway, Mrs. Pigthagoras thought that sounded very good. It would be nice to have a beautiful, wise child who was beneficial to mankind. But when Pigthagoras was born, she wasn't so sure. He was none of those things? Asked Derek. Oh, he was good-looking, said Nanny Piggins. We all are in our family. But the wisdom hadn't shown through yet, and he certainly didn't start benefiting mankind on day one. Well, he was just a baby, Samantha pointed out. True, said Nanny Piggins. But as the years went by, the wisdom and the benefit in mankind was slow to emerge, although he did show many of the classic Bramwell traits from an early age. Just so you understand, listener, Bramwell was Nanny Piggins' brother, and he was renowned for being lazy, cowardly, and no good at anything except running away, a skill in which he excelled at to Olympic levels. So it was natural for the children to wonder which of these traits Pigthagorus Piggins embodied. So which traits did he have? Asked Derek. Was he lazy? Did he steal credit for other people's work? Asked Samantha. Did he eat his body weight in chocolate every day? Asked Michael. No, but only because chocolate had not been invented yet, said Nanny Piggins. Well, it had been invented, but not on the continent in which he lived. No, Pigthagorus Piggins' problem was that he had the confidence of someone who was wise and beneficial to mankind, but he wasn't yet, so he did tend to get on people's nerves. Oh dear, said Samantha. Yes, overconfidence amongst the beautiful is a common dilemma, said Nanny Piggins. It's not their fault. It's everyone else's fault for being nice to them just because they're beautiful. It leads them to the misapprehension that they can do whatever they like. People let you do whatever you like all the time because you're staggeringly beautiful, Michael pointed out. Yes, that's how I know, said Nanny Piggins. The retired army colonel who lives around the corner wouldn't lend me his military equipment nearly as much if he weren't so desperately in love with me. Anyway, Samos was a small island, and by the time he was 18, Pigthagoras had irritated everyone who lived there, including his own parents, so they suggested he took a gap year. What, he travelled for a year before he went to university? Asked Derek. Well, no, because university hadn't been invented yet either, said Nanny Piggins. In those days, if you lived on a small island and you wanted to learn all the clever things there were to learn, you travelled to a big modern city. And this was the ancient history days, so the big modern cities back then were in Turkey, Egypt, and Babylon. So Mrs. Pigthagoras packed young Pigthagoras on a boat to Turkey, and the people of Samos sat back and enjoyed the peace and quiet of having him be away for a few years. Well, where did Pigthagoras go? Asked Derek. No one knows exactly, said Nanny Piggins. Pigthagorus didn't keep any diaries or journals, so no one knows for sure. They were just relieved he wasn't on Samos. Until he returned. And everyone was unhappy to see him, asked Samantha. No, remember he was staggeringly good-looking, and everyone likes good-looking people. And after several years, people had forgotten just how irritating Pigthagorus could be. And when he returned, he did have a lot of wisdom, which would go on to be beneficial to all of mankind. So the Oracle of Delphi was right, said Michael. It did seem that way, said Nanny Piggins. When Pigthagorus got off the boat, he had so many ideas to share. For a start, he had figured out triangles. Well, what's to figure out? Asked Michael. They've only got 3 sides. Pythagoras had figured out that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Huh? Said Michael. He'd figured out that if you have a right-angled triangle and you know the length of 2 sides, you can work out the length of the 3rd side using the equation a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Again, huh? Said Michael. Okay, I'll explain it using visual imagery. Imagine you have to climb in through the upstairs bathroom window because you've accidentally locked yourself out of the house and you've got a delicious chocolate cake baking in the oven, said Nanny Piggins. Gosh, said Michael. He knew how important this type of crisis was to his nanny. We know how high the bathroom window is from the ground, said Nanny Piggins. 3.7 metres, supplied Derek. They had measured it when they'd been dropping watermelons out of the window to test if gravity was real, and Isaac Newton really did know what he was talking about. He did, and the watermelon was delicious. And we know the base of the ladder would be right up against the fence, and we know where that is. 90 centimetres from the side of the house, said Samantha. They knew this because when they were running away from the police sergeant, Boris often got stuck between the house and the fence because he was a big-boned bear and was 1 metre wide. So we can use those numbers to work out how long we need the ladder to be, explained Nanny Piggins. But you usually just climb up the drain pipe, Michael pointed out. Just because I have no use for Pythagoras' theorem because I'm an elite athlete doesn't mean it isn't useful for other people. It's tremendously helpful for architects and engineers. It stops roofs from falling in and bridges from falling down. All right, I can see how that would be beneficial to mankind, said Michael. Exactly, said Nanny Piggins. Pigthagorus also discovered the relationship between music and mathematics, said Nanny Piggins. Is there a relationship between music and mathematics? Asked Boris. Of course, said Nanny Piggins. That is why musicians always count to 4 before they begin. Is that why they do it? Asked Boris. I always assumed they were just counting their fingers, but they'd had a horrible accident with a power tool, so they only got to 4. Pythagoras explained that he'd discovered the connection between maths and music when he'd walked past a blacksmith and heard the workers pounding on metal with hammers. The hammers made different sounds when they were different sizes. He was so excited by the discovery, he ran into the blacksmith's workshop and hit everything he could find with a hammer to test his principle. And he discovered it was true. Well, that is clever, I guess, said Derek. They were breakthrough ideas. They influenced all the great thinkers in ancient Greece who came along later. People like Socrates, Aristotle and Plato were all influenced by Pythagoras' ideas about mathematics. And they did write things down, which have gone on to influence philosophy and science ever since. Well, that's wonderful, said Samantha. So why did people make fun of Pythagoras in poems then? Well, some of his other ideas seemed silly at the time, said Nanny Piggins. Like what? Asked Derek. Well, Pigthagorus was also a big believer in being a vegetarian, said Nanny Piggins. Well, what's wrong with that? Asked Derek. You're a vegetarian. I've never seen you eat meat. I'm not a vegetarian, said Nanny Piggins. I am a desertitarian. I eat an 100% dessert-based diet for ethical reasons, because dessert tastes better, which is entirely logical, and I'm amazed more people don't adopt my desertitarian principles. Ice cream and chocolate alone have so much calcium, and lemon cake is full of vitamins. It's a tremendously healthy lifestyle. The children knew not to argue with Nanny Piggins on this point. She refused to accept scientific evidence that contradicted the empirical evidence of her taste buds. But Pythagoras had chosen the vegetarian diet for very different reasons, said Nanny Piggins. What reasons? Asked Michael. Because he had come to believe in reincarnation, said Nanny Piggins. Oh, I'm going to have to, that one too, said Michael. I don't know what reincarnation is. Pythagoras believed that all living things had souls and that when they died, their souls passed on into a new living thing, hopefully a more elevated living thing, and that eventually you would evolve up to a godlike status. "Oh," said Samantha, "I can see how that would be harder to prove than the thing about triangles." Yes, this is where some of the funny poems come from. Apparently, Pythagoras once stopped a man from beating his dog because Pythagoras said when the dog barked, he recognized its voice as the voice of his dead friend. "All right," said Samantha. "Well, at least he was encouraging people to be nice to animals." Yes, and to be fair, a lot of people did like his ideas. And as we have mentioned, Pythagoras was very good looking. So Pythagoras moved to Italy, which wasn't Italy at the time because Italy hadn't been invented. It was part of Greece, and set up a commune where everyone who agreed with Pythagoras could come and live and share all their stuff with him in exchange for him telling them about his clever ideas. "And people did that?" asked Derek. "Oh yes, they had nincompoops back in the ancient Greek history days too," said Nanny Piggins. So at this stage, it was going on very well for Pythagoras. "I can sense a but coming," said Derek. "Yes," agreed Nanny Piggins. But meanwhile, back in Greece, another radical new idea was spreading. The idea of democracy. Instead of having a powerful king who beat up anyone who disagreed with him and made the decisions for everybody else, they were trying a brand new system where everyone had a vote in how to run the government. "Well, that is a good idea," said Michael. "Yes, democracy really did take off and become popular eventually," said Nanny Piggins. The problem was, Pythagoras didn't like democracy. He liked being a leader and making all the decisions himself. He thought democracy was a silly idea, and he argued with people who wanted to bring it to his area. All the people who wanted to try democracy got very cross with him. Very, very cross. And there was a big fight. "Oh dear," said Samantha. "The men in your family aren't very good at fighting." "No, but they are good at running away," said Nanny Piggins. At first, Pythagoras and his followers took refuge in a temple, but the democracy fans set fire to the building. So Pythagoras' followers snuck him out the back door, and he ran out of town into a farmer's fields. "So Pythagoras got away?" asked Michael. "I'm afraid not. Everything was going well. Pythagoras was surprisingly good at running away. He was getting away from the people chasing him, but then he came to a bean field." "But beans aren't very big plants," said Samantha. "No, but remember, Pythagoras thought all living things had souls, including beans, so he didn't want to step on the plants. He stopped right next to the edge of the field. The crowd caught up with him, and that was that. He died because he didn't want to hurt a field of beans." "Well, I suppose that's quite nice," said Samantha. "It's quite silly," said Derek. "Yes, it's probably not true either," said Nanny Piggins. "It was probably a nasty story made up by his enemies who thought his ideas about reincarnation were silly. But it is a funny story, and it's an important principle of storytelling to never let the truth ruin a good tale." "But it does sound like Pythagoras really was super impressive if he came up with the founding principles of mathematics and music," said Derek. "Oh, indeed," said Nanny Piggins. "And that is what everyone believed for about 2,500 years, until modern archaeologists and historians learned more about what had been going on in Egypt and Babylon in ancient times. You see, the Babylonians had known all about Pythagoras' theorem 1,000 years before Pythagoras was born, although, of course, they didn't call it Pythagoras' theorem. They had another name for it. And you just have to take one look at the pyramids of Egypt to realise they'd figured out everything there was to know about triangles long before Pythagoras, too. The mathematical correlation with music had also been discovered by the Babylonians, and reincarnation was an idea that had long been believed in places like India. "So Pythagoras stole all his ideas?" said Samantha. "Well, no one knows exactly because he didn't write everything down, and we don't want to accuse someone of theft 2,500 years later, but it certainly looks like he may have, what's a nice way I can put this? He may have relabeled the ideas with his own personal labelling. But to be fair, the fact remains that even if Pythagoras just brought these ideas to Greece, that was still an enormous contribution to the evolution of knowledge in Europe. And given all the desserts we have today that were invented in Europe, we can say that Pythagoras was beneficial to mankind." The end. Time for bed. "Oh, thanks, Nanny Piggins. That actually helped with my maths homework," said Derek as he turned back to the textbook. "It did?" asked Nanny Piggins. "That was certainly not my intention. I would never aid and abet such a thing." "No, not the whole story, although that was very interesting, but the bit about breaking in through the bathroom window with a ladder, that helped me make sense of it all." "Well, if Pythagoras' theorem helps you break in and take a cake out of the oven, then I will permit you to learn about mathematics just this once," said Nanny Piggins. And that is the end of the story. Well, I hope you enjoyed that one. It was a little bit different. Well, that's it for now. I'm off on tour again, and goodness knows what story I will bring to you next. I have a few ideas, but we'll see what inspires me while I'm out there on the road. Okay, that's it for now. Until next time, goodbye. Hello, it's me again. If you enjoyed listening to Bedtime Stories with R.A. Spratt, it would be really helpful if you could like, subscribe, follow, and or review the show on whatever podcast platform you're listening to now. Every little one of those digital affirmations helps, and the bigger this podcast gets, the more I can justify procrastinating from my real job to keep bringing these stories to you. Thank you.